Why do so many smart people build up to a point when they're making a presentation, but they never actually land it? Or why do they skirt around the big idea and then never really land on that big idea until the end or near the end of their presentation or delivery? I want to show you how to make your messages a bit more immediately impactful using a really valuable framework that is used in many organisations and in particular used when speaking to senior people who may not have a lot of time to listen. A few weeks ago, I was running a training for one of my clients, Amazon, speaking to some of their project managers there. And what we were talking about is how to get senior leaders to listen to our ideas. And obviously senior leaders are really busy, they've got loads on their minds. So how can we shape what we're saying so that it becomes immediately interesting, relevant, and listened to by these individuals? And the same can apply in real life, right? It could be that you regularly speak to a partner or a family member and they can be distracted, or you've got to sit down and have a family meeting about something really important and you want to make sure that the impact of it really comes across. So the real problem is that quite often people structure their communication like it's a story, it's a Hollywood movie. And in those sorts of settings, quite often the big punchline comes at the end, right? Or the story is winding along and then there's a big reveal at the very end. And we feel that we need to bring that big reveal into our own speaking and communication. But when we want to have a family meeting or speak to a senior leader or speak at a conference or whatever it might be, that is not really the way that we should be communicating. And instead, what we should be doing is turning that on its head and really sharing the big idea first of all, so that people can sit with that and let it sink in. And then later on, we share more detail and then we give them the opportunity to perhaps ask questions. Why did you make that decision? How did you get to that conclusion? But we share the big idea first. We don't save it until the end. I remember years ago, I was a moderator at a conference. There were lots of different rooms with different speakers and groups in the different rooms. And to facilitate the opportunity for people to go from one room to the next after every talk, it was really important that all the speakers begin and end at the same time. Now, sometimes what happened was people would take a while to get into the particular room, and so we would start a little bit late, but we still would have to end on time, end really punctually, so that people could go off again. One particular person came to speak, and unfortunately for her, because of the way things were in the logistics, she lost a few minutes at the beginning of her presentation. And the way that she'd scheduled that presentation and arranged it was that there was lots of supporting information, supporting data, and then she'd set it up so that the big reveal, we've used this data to come up with this conclusion, the big reveal was right at the very end. Now, I bet you can imagine what happened, right? Given that time was short, she shared all the supporting information, she shared the stories, etc. And then, just as she got to the moment for the big reveal, boom, time was up. Everyone had to stop what they were doing and then go off to the next session in the conference. So you can imagine how upset this individual was. And I remember her being quite near to tears almost and saying, look, I just didn't get to the end. I didn't tell them the most important part. What a waste of time. And the takeaway from that is that we should be using frameworks like BLUF, B-L-U-F, which stands for bottom line up front. And we need to be delivering that bottom line up front so that even if we only get a very short amount of time to speak, we've still delivered the main point that we are there for. Whether we get half the amount of time, 3/4, even a quarter, doesn't matter. We've got that big idea across. The bottom line up front, the BLUF framework, is a really valuable one. It's one that I mention in my book, Never Lost for Words, which will be published later in 2026. And it's a framework you can use whenever attention might be limited. So people may not be able to follow you through all your arguments and data that you have. So you want to make sure that you get that bottom line out there up front and don't gamble on people's attention being with you the whole time. You can also use it when time is a little bit limited. Again, like this individual at the conference, she could have scheduled her presentation and had that bottom line up front, and then she could just give whatever she felt was relevant in terms of the supporting detail, knowing that the main point was out there. And sometimes people think it's a bit of a blunt-edged tool because this is what we need to do, and then here's the detail, as opposed to finessing your way into the big idea. But I see it as being respectful of people's time and giving people more time to absorb the big idea and think about it and come up with questions and points of their own, rather than throwing it in at the end and leaving people like, oh, okay, we'll have to carry on next time because the meeting's over now or the conversation's finished. An example of that might be, let's say that you're living in an area where you're considering buying a property. Perhaps you're currently renting there and you want to buy, but you realise that the market is really stagnating and that various factors are coming together to make it maybe not the best area to buy in. So what you could start would be not using BLUF. I've looked on some websites to get some information about mortgages, and I've looked at Rightmove and various other estate agents, and just historically been looking at the trend in the pricing of these properties. So you could start there and start talking about maybe different neighbourhoods or 3-bedroom places or places with a garden or whatever it is, right? You could start there and peruse all the various different kind of permutations and combinations of the houses you're looking at and the mortgage rates and the pricing. Or you could start like this and say something like, I've realised that it's not a good idea to buy in this neighbourhood at this point in time. And maybe you pause for a moment for people to absorb that. And you say, here are some reasons why. And then you start sharing the data. So everything you share, every detail you share is then assessed in the light of your big idea, which is, this is not the place to buy in, not the place to buy. It just adds a lot of clarity to things for the listeners. And I think it's just a much more impactful way of communicating. In conclusion, the framework, bottom line up front, you share the big idea and then you share the supporting data afterwards. And you can even tier that, the data, right? So big idea, you could have why you chose that idea and then some more detailed bits and pieces of information that support your decision. But the point is, big idea up front. And I want you to think about, this is not Netflix, this is not a storytelling competition, right? Don't make people wait for the ending. Start with the end and then share the detail after that. So next time you've got an update to make, you've decided on a restaurant to go to with your friends or whatever it might be, start thinking about sharing that conclusion first and then the supporting information, and see how that feels and see how people respond to you. That's it for today. I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you next time.